Hello, and welcome to the Behavior Education Connection, the podcast that works to connect the world of behavior analysis and the world of education. We focus on topics important to behavior analysts who work in the public schools and those who support them. Join us and spend time gaining insights and ideas as our host talks with fellow behavior analysts as well as other experts in the field.
Hello again, and welcome back to the Behavior Education Connection. I'm your host, Dr. Selena Layden, and I am excited today to be joined by Elizabeth Loftus. Hi, Elizabeth. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself for everybody?
Yeah, so I'm Elizabeth Loftus. Started my career as a public school teacher in 2016 and left to enter the ABA field in 2019. I've been a BCBA for almost 5 years now, and I work in the schools and provide trainings across the state.
Great. Well, I'm really glad to have you today. We're going to be talking about an interesting topic that we haven't really explored a little bit, and it's really that connection between some of our students' early learning histories and then what happens when they get into the school system. And then hopefully have a little bit of a conversation about what we can do as school-based behavior analysts to help with some of this. So, Elizabeth, you have had an interest in that infant mental health and wellness realm. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and why this is an interest for you?
Yeah, so it didn't start as a career interest for me, but when I got pregnant with my first child, I got a little interested in infant mental health, but when my child arrived and we brought her home, and me and my husband were like, oh my goodness, what did we do? Because it wasn't anything that we expected it to be. Um, I just started reading about infant mental health, about co-regulation, what the research said, how it related to how we were practicing as parents in our home. And I learned that it had a really cool connection to the ABA field, almost in a way where it merged attachment theory with ABA. And it was a big revelation for me, just as a parent, but also as a practitioner, because I was like, wow, there's a lot of things that we're missing when kids come to us in the public schools. There's this whole learning history that's pre-established that has bigger impacts than I think we think it does. And we're not programming for that.
Yeah, and I think that's always been true, but I think it became super abundantly obvious that that's true when COVID happened, right? So COVID, of course, hit in 2020. It's now 2025, and now all those children that were born during those years are entering the public school now. And I don't know if you feel the same way, but I know that I hear a lot from folks in the field that kids don't have the same learning histories that they had. And so they didn't attend mommy and me classes. They didn't attend the library classes. They didn't do gymnastics or whatever the case may be when they were really young. And so they're missing some of those essential skills that kids typically had learned previously. Skills like being able to sit in a group, being able to follow group directions, being able to watch other kids and know what they're supposed to do. Are you seeing similar things?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think COVID changed child development or what
No.
children need, but I think it definitely changed how kids established a learning history before they entered school. I also think it didn't allow for many opportunities for frustration with peer interaction or having to transition, or having to do non-preferred things because there wasn't much we could do. And so I think rightfully so, a lot of parents had to manage how they could, keeping their kids happy at home and regulated because we had a lot of parents that worked while they had their children at home during COVID. And so it just really changed the landscape of how parents were providing opportunities for learning in those first 3 to 5 years. And then we saw the spillover when those kids come to us in school, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, just from my own personal experience, you're right. Working while you have kids at home, which was not a choice for most people, people had to make that work. It was not easy by any means. And so, it's understandable that we are where we are. But kids are now in school, fast forward, and they may be missing some of those critical skills. And so, what does that mean now for our teachers, our school-based behavior analysts that we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think there's a lot of different answers. But I think the biggest thing that it means is the students that are coming to us cannot regulate as easily or as efficiently as they could have maybe before. And that regulation piece is the piece that kind of affects everything else, right? So if they can't regulate easy, then they're not in a state where they're able to readily learn skills. So we're trying to teach skills, but they're not picking them up or picking all of them up because they're not regulated enough to be in a state where they're able to learn. It means we see a quicker 0 to 10 escalation. So we're not seeing all the precursor behaviors that we would have seen before with kids. We're just seeing them be pretty regulated. One thing happens that throws them off, and then they go into complete escalation. We don't see them cycle up the same way that we used to. And then it means the peer interaction piece that they get in kindergarten is not as meaningful as it used to be. If they're not able to regulate themselves during play or group activity, they're not able to have the peer interactions that lead to really that foundation of social skills that we use throughout our lifetime because they're not regulated enough to be able to learn how to have that reciprocal interaction with peers. So it's a lot of things that it affects, but I think that regulation piece is the foundation and what we really need to target as teachers or behavior analysts in the school, because it's a prerequisite for everything else that is to come throughout the school career.
Yeah, 100%. And I think just to be really clear, you're not suggesting by any means, like behavior analysis still applies 100%,
Mhm.
right? We are still, as we are talking about some of these potentially more mentalistic concepts, I think it's important to note that while there may be differences from what we've seen historically, behavior analysis and the principles of behavior are still in play here. And so we still have the same that there are contingencies, there are antecedents, there are consequences. I think and I wish that I had really good data on this, but anecdotally, what I've seen is exactly what you're saying. So instead of children there'd be some antecedent, and then children could persevere potentially longer before engaging in interfering behavior, they may not have those same abilities to cope, right? And so those things that would, again, those antecedents that may be leading to interfering behavior, we may not need as many of them to get to that interfering behavior as we once did.
Yeah, we may not need as many of them, or we may not need as big of ones
Right,
as
the
we would see
intensity. Yes,
before. But
absolutely.
but yeah, the applied behavior analysis and the principles of that absolutely still apply, even though we're talking about regulation and emotion. There's some really good research that I like by James McKenna. There's a book called The Nurture Revolution by a neuroscientist. And what they do is they talk about how children learn regulation skills. And what they say is they learn regulation skills through seeing it modeled by a trusting caregiver, right? So we can equate that to pairing with our students. How do you build trust? How do you become a trusted caregiver? Well, in ABA, we pair with our kids, right? And then the next step to building regulation of emotions is honoring their requests and meeting their needs. Well, in ABA, we just have a different term for that. We call that functional communication. And so that still applies. So there's this crossover effect in how you teach regulation skills, emotional regulation skills with the principles of ABA. So we can't necessarily see the emotions that our students are feeling, but we can still apply principles in our field to shape the behaviors that are a result of the emotions that they're experiencing.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. And I think the other piece of that is we need to help students learn to be able to recognize their own emotion and their own emotional states. And so when I feel my muscles tighten, when I feel my face get hot, whatever the case may be, these are then behaviors that I can engage in to calm myself down, to not lead to that interfering behavior that we don't want to see, obviously. And that is teaching those regulation skills, right? Teaching the coping skills that students need to be able to, you know, to persevere longer before they end up engaging in interfering behavior. And I think your point about the modeling coping skills is really important. And I think, unfortunately, the last 5 years, although I feel like hopefully we're coming out of it, but you know, in 2020, 2021, et cetera, we had a lot of students who were in homes. All of us were stressed. There was, no matter how you felt about COVID, there were stressors that were occurring in your environment. And so if that's the environment that children grew up in, they may or may not have gotten to see the strong coping skills that we want them to be able to experience at those young ages. And again, no judgment. Everybody was dealing with these things, but it was just a very interesting setting event that was occurring that I think is commonly, I think it's an unusual thing, at least in my lifetime, that we all have experienced this very common setting event that led to changes in behavior. But COVID definitely was one of those. So, what advice would you give to school-based behavior analysts these days to start really working through some of this so that students can be more successful?
Yeah, well, I think if we know that the foundation for learning regulation skills, which leads to the school-based skills that we need students to have to be successful, if that is modeling from a trusted caregiver and then honoring that communication, that functional communication training, the first thing that I like to do with all of our incoming staff is just have a roundtable discussion of, do they know how to regulate their own emotions, right? Because I think it's very important to make our students more relatable and humanize them for staff. Not saying that staff don't dehumanize our students, but I think it's easy to look at kids sometimes and say, well, because you're a kid, you have to do as I say, right?
Right.
And I think I hear that quite often from some teachers and other professionals in the field. And I think of how I would respond, and I also think about how our staff would respond if we told them that, and I don't think it would go very well. So I try to make it more relatable and with staff. So how do you know when you're dysregulated? How do you know when you're getting frustrated? What does that look like? Are you regulated all the time? Do you behave appropriately all the time? I know I don't. And so I put my faults on the table too. When my husband makes me mad, sometimes I raise my voice, right? And so if we as adults do these inappropriate behaviors sometimes, I think it's a
I
little
like to call
easier.
those I like to call those inappropriate verbalizations that we
It,
all may experience at times. Yes.
that we all experience. Absolutely. It makes it a little more understandable that our students are going to experience that too, because they haven't had the opportunity to build coping skills throughout their life like we have. So I think number one, that's the thing that's had the biggest impact, is helping staff understand, okay, what makes you frustrated? Even in the classroom, if a student is dysregulated, do you start getting frustrated with that? And then what are things you as an adult do to help yourself calm down? Because a lot of times you'll hear different answers. And so when I hear different answers, I say, well, our students have different ways of calming themselves down too. Not everybody can just count to 10 or take deep breaths and calm down. And so we need to learn what our students need individually that helps them calm down, that's appropriate in the school setting. And then to go back to a point you made, teaching them how to recognize some of those precursors in themselves of when they're starting to get frustrated as an antecedent strategy. What we've done in some of our older age groups in the school is our school actually bought heart rate monitors. And so if they're in one of our behavior programs in our district, they have access to a heart rate monitor. And so they can see visually how their body is responding to the stress. And we have to teach that, right? But we also teach, okay, look, we're noticing that your heart rate's going up. So what are you feeling? And then what are the things you can do? Can you ask for a break? Can you ask to go to a different space? Like, what do you need to help your body calm down so that we don't get to the point of severe escalation? That's been a big thing for us. And then I would say the third thing that we've done is we've built programs in each of our schools. So a lot of times when I train staff, on, okay, if you need to take a walk outside to calm down when you're frustrated, how can we allow that for our students? The answer I universally get is, we don't have enough staff to do that. We don't have enough time in our day to do that. We might not be allowed to do that. And so that's a big barrier to allowing our students to learn what they need to cope. And so we designed a program that has 2 staff members in each building that has much more flexibility. And their main job is to step in that precursor space before we hit escalation, and either do push-in with students to say, what do you need right here to calm down? Prompt them to ask for a break, prompt them to ask for space, or we do a pull out. So if we're noticing that they're dysregulated every single day, they might need a little more intensive support. And so we teach the skills in a separate space and then generalize them to the classroom. And that's a program that all students have access to, not just maybe our SPED students. And that's been really helpful because teachers are right. They don't have the flexibility to always give kids what they need to remain calm, or to always give them the amount of attention and time that they need to learn the skills to stay regulated in the classroom setting.
I think that's a really cool idea. And I love the creativity in, okay, if this is a true barrier, and I get it, right? If you have one teacher and 22 little pumpkins, you cannot just walk out of the room with a kid. I totally understand that. But creatively problem solving through that, because the reality is, as adults, we have learned our own self-coping strategies, right? And so we stand up in the back of the room, we go use the restroom, whether we actually need to use the restroom or not, because we just need to get out of a situation for a few minutes. We close our eyes for 30 seconds, whatever the case may be. We've learned these skills, but we have to make sure that students have the access to be able to engage in those skills as well. And so I love the creative problem solving that you all have really thought through to be able to do that, because the reality is, if we don't let students do those things, then they're going to engage in interfering behavior that's going to, unfortunately, likely escalate to a point where now the whole class is disrupted, and now no learning is occurring for not only that student, but for anyone. And that's a problem that we don't want to get to. So if we can try to think through how to get past some of these logistical barriers, I think that that's just a really, really good proactive solution.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. If we don't give them what they're needing, they're going to engage in a behavior to get what they're needing, and it's probably not going to be as appropriate. So how can we give them what is functionally equivalent in the educational setting with the limitations that we have? And I think if the behavior analyst in the district can help identify those barriers and maybe take that to the leadership team, I think you can be really creative with that. It doesn't have to all look the same. We found that developing the programs worked for our district. Other districts might have other things that they could do that break down those barriers and allow for that fluidity or flexibility, I would say. So it's not a one size fits all, but I think if you can identify the barrier, then you can start to find some solutions to that to help the students and really the staff.
Yeah, because sometimes the barrier is a real barrier, right? There's 22 kids, 17, 28, whatever the kids may be, and there's one of me, and I don't know how to make this work. Sometimes the barrier is, I don't have the skills myself to make this work. And then sometimes the barrier is, I don't want to do that. We go back to that can't do, want do problem. And if we can really pinpoint those behaviors, then we can problem solve how to remove the barriers so that we can make it work for everybody. So I love that. I think that that's great. This kind of brings us to the end of our conversation, but do you have anything else that you want to share?
I don't, but I really appreciate you having me here today.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on and having this conversation. I think this is a topic that a lot of people are dealing with and working through right now. And even when we're not talking about our kindergartners, our first graders, our second graders, I think, coping skills and being able to endure antecedents that often could lead to interfering behaviors, but change our behavior to lead to a different path, I think is relevant to everybody. So thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise today. This brings us to the end of our episode. Thank you to our listeners for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Behavior Education Connection. Join us next time for another great conversation about behavior analysis in the schools. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on an episode. Sending out a special thanks to the Virginia Department of Education for supporting our work. We look forward to connecting with you all again soon.